Hi guys, welcome to chapter 10. Today we're going to talk about nutrition, fitness, and physical activity. So first topic, physical activity, fitness, and health. So the definition of fitness is a set of attributes related to the ability to perform routine physical activities without undue fatigue. The four components of fitness, it's important that you know these four. The four components of fitness are endurance, strength, flexibility, and body composition. Also, we have the definition here of the overload principle, which are adaptations in the body so that the body can do more. In other words, this is what allows you to lift heavier weights over time, run faster over time, right? Your body has the ability to adapt, to become stronger, to become quicker as you repeat that activity over and over again. Cardiorespiratory endurance is the efficiency with which the body delivers to cells the oxygen and nutrients needed for muscular activity and transports waste products from cells. We're going to talk about both aerobic and anaerobic exercise and what that means in the body. First, we have aerobic exercise, which works to lower your resting heart rate. Your heart pumps blood more efficiently, so it can pump less often. So, when you engage in aerobic exercise, it actually strengthens your heart and allows it to beat at a slower rate, even when you're not exercising. Aerobic exercise also increases aerobic capacity, also known as VO2 max, which is your muscle's ability to use oxygen to make ATP. Lastly, aerobic exercise increases your cardiorespiratory endurance. Muscle strengthening exercise. So we had aerobic exercise first that really works to strengthen your heart and lungs. This would be aerobic exercise would be like running, swimming, playing maybe soccer or basketball. Muscle strengthening exercise differs from aerobic exercise in that you aren't necessarily moving really quickly, but instead you're focusing on working a particular muscle group. Muscle strengthening exercise can be divided into muscle strength and muscle endurance. Muscle strength enhances the ability to perform tasks such as pushing or lifting, and muscle endurance enhances the ability to continue repetitive muscle activity. So muscle strength, you can think about it as the ability to say, if somebody was in a weightlifting competition, they're going to do one lift with the heaviest weight that they can. That would be muscle strength, all right? Putting all that force into a single lift of the heaviest weight possible. Muscle endurance would be the number of repetitions that you're able to do. So it wouldn't necessarily be the heaviest weight that you can possibly lift. It might be a lighter weight, but your goal is to get in more reps rather than the heaviest weight at a single rep. Flexibility. Flexibility determines range of motion and improves performance in certain activities and can reduce the risk of injuries. Body composition. A physically fit person has a greater proportion of muscle and a smaller proportion of fat than an unfit person of the same weight. For young adult women, the desirable body fat is 21 to 32% of total weight, and in adult men, the desirable amount is 8 to 19%. So you'll notice that the ideal body fat percentage for females is much higher than males. When I say ideal, this is what is considered a healthy level. Certainly, what is considered ideal in the media is not aligned with what's considered ideal from a nutritional standpoint. Now, the diagram on the right is comparing a fit adult male to an unfit adult male, and you can see how the adult male that's considered to be fit has a much lower percentage of body fat and higher lean body mass than an unfit individual. So the benefits of exercise. Probably you guys know that exercise is beneficial. We're just going to go over a few specific examples. So exercise prevents or delays the onset of chronic disease, releases chemical endorphins, which may enhance mood and aid in relaxation, pain tolerance, and appetite control. It improves mood, self-esteem, vigor, overall well-being, and quality of life, while also reducing depression and anxiety. Exercise and weight management. Exercise increases total energy expenditure through increased energy output during exercise, energy expenditure that persists for a period after exercise, and also increases your lean muscle mass. Now, your lean muscle mass can also increase your basal needs over the long term. So that means when your body's at rest, when you're not exercising, when your body is just using calories to keep itself going, exercising over the long term can actually increase your basal needs so that even when you're not exercising, you're just burning more calories just going about your daily life. Exercise increases energy expenditure. So in your textbook, in this chapter, it asks the question, why does regular exercise cause an increase in basal metabolism? Remember, that's just your very, very baseline caloric needs. Okay? Now the answer is regular exercise leads to an increase in muscle mass. Muscle is more metabolically active than fat, so in two people of the same body weight, the person with more muscle will have a higher BMR. And that's exactly what it shows here in this graph. So the first example on the left is an individual who would be considered sedentary. The middle example is an individual who's generally sedentary but engages in 30 minutes of moderate exercise, and then the person on the right engages in regular exercise. And you'll see that the basal metabolism, which is the blue portion, is higher the more exercise a person engages in. Then the amount of caloric needs for physical activity increases, and then the TEF stays the same. The TEF, remember, is the thermic effective food. So you'll notice that total calorie expenditure for the sedentary individual is about 2,000 calories per day, whereas the person engaging in regular exercise, their calorie needs are closer to 2,500. All right, exercise recommendations. The 2010 dietary guidelines recommend greater than or equal to 150 minutes of moderate intensity or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity each week, or an equivalent combination of both. A good way to remember this, I like to just remember the moderate intensity piece. So 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity a week is equal to 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday. So you can think 30 minutes times 5 days is 150. Pretty good way of remembering it, and a good way to think of it when you're reminding yourself to get physical activity. So what's the difference between moderate intensity and vigorous intensity physical activity? Your book has several examples, but here we have moderate intensity exercise as the equivalent of walking 3 miles an hour or bicycling 8 miles an hour. Vigorous intensity exercise is considered jogging greater than or equal to 5 miles an hour or bicycling greater than or equal to 10 miles an hour. The dietary guidelines also include a recommendation of muscle strengthening activities 2 or more days a week. What to look for in a fitness program. First, you want to make sure that it includes aerobic exercise so that you're able to really work on strengthening your heart and your lungs. You want it to include stretching exercises to work on your flexibility and help to reduce injury. And you also want it to include muscle strengthening exercises so that you can work on building muscular endurance. A good fitness program will also be able to be integrated into an active lifestyle that includes a variety of everyday activities, enjoyable recreational activities, and a minimum amount of time spent in sedentary activities. Exercise recommendations. I know this probably appears pretty small for you, but it is taken right from your text, so feel free to check it out there. This graphic is just showing, we have a calendar up at the top, and it's showing you an example schedule for somebody who's working on integrating physical activity into their weekly schedule. So you'll see the orange squares represent aerobic activities, and the blue squares represent strength and flexibility. There are also little icons and bulleted lists there of examples of what would be considered aerobic activities and strength and flexibility activities. And then just in the upper right hand corner, it gives a list of things that you might do in your everyday life that you might not necessarily consider activities, but help to contribute to an active lifestyle. So I encourage you to check that out and use it to think about ways that you are currently active and ways that you might increase physical activity in your daily life. The aerobic zone. Aerobic zone you might hear when people are talking about vigorous physical activity. Now, in order to be in the aerobic zone, an aerobic activity must raise your heart rate to 60 to 85% of its maximum. To get the maximum benefit from an exercise that you're doing, you want to exercise at an intensity that puts your heart rate in that aerobic zone, in that 60 to 85% of its maximum. This graph comes right from your text, so if it's difficult to read, you can always check it out there. This graph is showing you how to find your aerobic zone. So across the bottom, the x-axis is age in years, and up the left-hand side, the y-axis is heart rate in beats per minute. So if you were looking at the aerobic zone for somebody who is 30 years old, you would go across here to 30 years old, and then you would go straight up. And for somebody who, if they're a female, their aerobic zone would be from probably about 114 beats per minute to probably, 150 beats per minute for a female, and then for a male, that would probably be about 115 beats a minute to probably about 170 beats per minute. So the blue lines are the for males, and the red lines are for females. So you can check that out on the slide or in your text to help figure out what heart rate would be considered your aerobic zone. Creating an active lifestyle. So how can you add activity just to your daily schedule in small amounts so that you don't necessarily even have to think about it? You could ride your bike to class or work, take a walk during your lunch break, enjoy an outdoor game with family or friends. It's important if you are increasing physical activity in your life that any lifestyle changes are made gradually. This is important so that you don't maybe overexert or injure yourself, and gradual lifestyle changes are also more likely to be things that you stick with. Also, if you have any injuries or chronic conditions, you may want to consult a doctor before starting a vigorous physical activity regimen. All right, this table is table 10.1 in your text. Just stuff we've already chatted about, but kind of showing it in a different way, focusing on creating an active lifestyle. So you want to make sure you start slowly, set specific attainable goals, and once you have met those goals, increase them or add additional goals. Make your exercise fun and convenient. Work to stay motivated, and make sure to keep your exercise safe. Overtraining syndrome. Overtraining syndrome is defined as excessive training without sufficient rest to allow for recovery. Symptoms of overtraining syndrome include fatigue that limits workouts and is felt even at rest, decreased appetite, weight loss, muscle soreness, increased frequency of viral illnesses, increased incidence of injuries, mood changes, depression, altered sleep patterns, and a loss of competitive desire and enthusiasm. Fueling exercise. So, all right, you've decided you need to be more active. You're going to add some physical activity into your daily life. Now, how are you going to go about fueling that activity? So, first we're going to talk about ATP production, and this is where we see aerobic versus anaerobic metabolism. Anaerobic metabolism is completed without oxygen. It only uses glucose for fuel, and the byproduct of anaerobic metabolism is lactic acid. This is in comparison to aerobic metabolism, which is completed with oxygen. In aerobic metabolism, your body uses carbohydrates, protein, and fat for fuel. Aerobic metabolism is more efficient, produces more ATP per glucose used, and occurs in your mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of the cell. So the mitochondria are an organelle that you have in each of your cells. Getting oxygen to your muscle cells. So this picture comes from your book. If you need to see it bigger, you can check it out there. It's a pretty basic diagram of how your respiratory system and your circulatory system interact. So when you breathe in, oxygen comes into your airway, into your lungs. That oxygen, once in your lungs, is then absorbed into your bloodstream. That blood with its oxygen goes into your heart, and your heart pumps to push that oxygenated blood out to the muscles of your body. Then once there, the blood drops off the oxygen into your muscles, which your muscles then use for movement. Once cellular respiration takes place in those muscle cells, your muscles have the waste product of carbon dioxide. So the oxygen is dropped off in your muscles, then carbon dioxide is released into your blood. The blood then takes that carbon dioxide back up into your heart, which then pumps that blood and carbon dioxide into your lungs. The carbon dioxide is dropped off. You breathe that carbon dioxide out while taking in more oxygen into your lungs, which is then added to the blood, which your heart pumps out into the muscles, and the cycle begins again. So this cycle is taking place all the time, 24 hours a day. You're not even thinking about it, but you're breathing, your muscles are working, your body's burning calories, and this cycle just goes on and on and on. Changes in the source of ATP over time. So if your body requires instant energy, this graph is showing how your body fuels itself over different durations of activity. So instant energy. During the first few seconds of exercise, the muscles get energy from stored ATP. Okay, that's this red here. From ATP, which is a creatine phosphate. Then for the next 10 seconds or so, creatine phosphate stored in the muscles is broken down to form more ATP. So you can see how those energy needs are really instant and then they drop right off. Then after 30 or so seconds, your body starts looking to forms of short-term energy. So this yellow line represents anaerobic metabolism of glucose. So anaerobic metabolism then takes over. During anaerobic metabolism, you'll remember that your body uses glucose for fuel. This glucose can be obtained either from the blood or from muscle glycogen, becomes the predominant source of energy once your creatine phosphate stores have been depleted during that initial burst of exercise. 30 seconds into the activity, your anaerobic pathways are operating at full capacity. Now, after about 2 to 3 minutes, we have this blue line, your aerobic metabolism starts to take over. Now, aerobic, you'll remember, is energy production in the presence of oxygen. So after about 2 to 3 minutes, when your body requires a long-term energy, oxygen delivery to the muscles increases enough to support aerobic metabolism, which uses fatty acids and glucose to produce energy. So you'll notice that aerobic metabolism doesn't start immediately, right? It takes a little bit of time for, once you start being physically active. When you immediately start that activity, your body will send messages to your brain, letting it know, hey, all right, we're increasing activity. And then it takes a little bit of time for those messages to be sent to your heart and lungs to increase oxygen, the rate of oxygen being moved to your muscles. And during that time, your body, while it's waiting for the extra oxygen to get there, is able to rely on ATP, creatine phosphate stores, and then the anaerobic metabolism of glucose until that extra oxygen arrives, which takes about 2 to 3 minutes, at which point your body begins engaging in aerobic metabolism. This is just saying what we just talked about on the last slide, just reiterating during the first few seconds of exercise, stored ATP is used, then creatine phosphate is broken down to make ATP. After about 15 seconds of exercise, anaerobic metabolism uses glucose to make ATP. After 2 to 3 minutes of exercise, your breathing and your heart rate have increased, allowing that extra oxygen to get to your muscles so that aerobic metabolism can use glucose and fatty acids to make ATP. This diagram, again, from your textbook, just showing you the different fuels that are used in anaerobic versus aerobic metabolism. So anaerobic metabolism, we have the example here on the left, using only glucose as fuel. Okay. During aerobic metabolism, we have glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids all being used for fuel, and this shows you where those fatty acids, those amino acids, and that glucose come from in the body. Okay, so it's important, obviously, to know the difference between anaerobic metabolism and aerobic metabolism, where they get their fuel from, and where that fuel originates in the body. What a scientist sees. So when we talk about different types of activity and how many calories they burn per hour, if somebody is doing an exercise at a low intensity, they're in what's known as the fat burning zone, where 50% of the calories used for that exercise come from carbohydrate and 50% come from fat. At a higher intensity, it's known as the cardio zone, where 40% of the calories burned come from fat and 60% come from carbohydrates. So this can be a little confusing. In a higher intensity activity, a lower percentage of the calories burned come from fat. However, because the total number of calories burned is higher, even though you burn a lower percentage of calories from fat, the total number of fat calories that you burn might be equal or greater than the amount of calories burned in the fat burning zone of lower intensity activities. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I know it can be a little confusing when we talk about proportions and percentages as they compare to total overall expenditure. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Actually, probably would be better to ask in lab, just in case others have the same question. Exercise intensity and fuel use with low intensity activity, ATP produced from glucose and fatty acids by aerobic metabolism. With higher intensity exercise, more ATP is needed, oxygen delivery to and use by muscles is limited, and muscles make ATP by anaerobic metabolism. The effect of exercise intensity on fuel use. When you are at rest, so this is showing you different levels of activity, and on the left we have the percentage of ATP from different nutrients. So when you're at rest, the smallest amount of energy comes from amino acids, then some from glucose, and then some from fatty acids. As you increase the intensity of your physical activity, more and more of that energy comes from glucose. Okay. Fatigue. Fatigue is defined as the inability to continue activity at an optimal level. It occurs when glycogen stores are depleted and occurs much more quickly with high intensity exercise because it relies more on anaerobic metabolism, which only uses glucose. Sometimes fatigue can be described as hitting the wall. You often hear this described in long distance or marathon runners. This is because your body is only able to store so much glycogen. So once those glycogen stores have been depleted, a person can really feel a significant depletion of energy. So people who run long distances sometimes describe this feeling of hitting a wall. That's just what occurs when their glycogen stores have been completely depleted, and their body is searching for another source of fuel. Lactic acid is produced during anaerobic metabolism. During low intensity exercise, small amounts of lactic acid that are produced are carried away from muscles and used by other tissues as an energy source or converted back into glucose by the liver. During high intensity exercise, that lactic acid builds up in muscle and then your blood, since the amount produced is greater than the amount used by other tissues. However, this buildup of lactic acid isn't a major factor in muscle fatigue. Physiological changes caused by aerobic training. So this is showing, this is a, I can't even think. This is an enlarged picture of muscle tissue. Certainly muscle tissue is going to become stronger the more you engage in activity. This is a blown up picture of a blood vessel. You can see these red blood cells just kind of chugging along. Your heart rate and ability to move blood and oxygen throughout your body is increased also as you increase your physical activity. Energy and nutrient needs for physical activity. So diet needs. Obviously, you need energy to fuel physical activity. The amount of energy expended for any activity depends on the intensity, duration, and frequency of the activity and the weight of the exerciser. Your body needs protein to maintain muscle mass, micronutrients to permit use of energy yielding nutrients, and water to transport nutrients and cool the body. Factors affecting energy expenditure. We talked about both body weight, body size, and intensity of activity. So in this example, you have an individual weighing 125 pounds and an individual weighing 170 pounds. So for the person, if somebody is 125 pounds, if they're running a 12-minute mile, if it takes them 12 minutes to run a mile, they will burn off 400 calories in an hour. If somebody is running a 6-minute mile, they will be burning off 800 calories an hour. So you'll notice at a quicker pace, this person is burning off more calories. The same is true for somebody at 170 pounds. Obviously, running at a quicker pace causes them to burn off more calories. However, even if they're running a 6-minute mile, just like the 125-pound person, the 170-pound person will burn off more calories just because of their body size. So we see calorie needs increase both for intensity level and for starting body weight. Gaining or losing weight. Healthy weight gain can be achieved through a combination of increased energy intake, adequate protein intake, and muscle strengthening exercise to promote an increase in lean tissue versus an increase in fat or adipose tissue. Healthy weight loss can be done by reducing energy intake by from 200 to 500 calories per day. If you remember back from the last chapter, losing a pound is the equivalent of a reduction in 3,500 calories per day. A good way to remember this is this healthy weight loss guideline of 500 calories per day times 7 days a week would equal 3,500 calorie reduction over the course of a week and body weight reduction of a pound. Healthy weight loss also includes an increase in physical activity and changing the behaviors that led to weight gain in the first place. Macronutrient needs. For an active individual, carbohydrate needs equals 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day. Fat, 20 to 35% of calories should come from fat. It's the same as the recommendation for the general population. And protein needs 15 to 20% of total calories. This is important to both maintain and repair lean tissues. In endurance athletes, the recommendation changes to 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And for athletes that are strength training, that recommendation is 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, depending on the level of their activity. Proportions of energy yielding nutrients in an athlete's diet. This is right from your text. I'm not going to read through the whole thing because it is just reiterating stuff from the previous couple of slides. You'll see this is just an example of an athlete's diet where 60% of their total calories come from carbohydrate, 20 to 25% come from fat, and 15 to 20% are coming from protein. Vitamin and mineral needs. For an athlete, generally, the vitamin and mineral needs are the same as the needs for the general population. Vitamins and minerals are, of course, needed for energy production, oxygen delivery, protection against oxidative damage, and repair and maintenance of body structures. Your body, during periods of physical activity, use vitamins and minerals more, and loss can increase with exercise depending on the activity. DRIs, or daily recommended intakes, acknowledge that the iron requirement may be 30 to 70% higher for athletes than the general population. Now, iron iron needs do increase for those who are physically active. Generally, as we said here, most vitamin and mineral needs stay the same. However, iron is a primary component of hemoglobin in your blood. Now, hemoglobin is responsible for carrying oxygen through your blood to your muscle tissue. So it would make sense then that in somebody who's physically active, who has increased needs for oxygen, that you would also increase your need for iron, so that you can generate more hemoglobin and carry oxygen more efficiently through your blood to the rest of your body. Water needs. Exercise increases water needs because it increases water loss from sweat and respiratory system evaporation. The risk of dehydration is greater in hot weather than cold environments, though dehydration can still occur in the cold. Water is needed to cool the body and transport oxygen and nutrients to the muscles, as well as remove waste products. Dehydration and performance. So a quick little quiz question here. If a person loses 4% of their body weight as water during a competition, by what percentage will their performance be decreased by the end of the event? So you can just kind of look over here on the graph on the right. So if a person loses 4% of their body weight as water during a competition, so you'll want to go over on the x-axis, look at 4% dehydration. What percentage will their performance be decreased? So I'll give you a second to look at that. So the answer is D, a 25% decline. So you'll notice if you go over to 4% dehydration, that a person would be performing at 75% of their optimal maximum performance. So 75% would equal a 25% decline. So the answer would be D, 25%. Dehydration occurs when water loss is great enough for blood volume to decrease. It reduces the ability of the circulatory system to deliver oxygen and nutrients to muscle. It also reduces blood flow to the skin and sweat production, limiting the body's ability to cool itself. This can increase core body temperature and increase the likelihood of heat-related illness. So heat-related illnesses, these include heat cramps, which are involuntary muscle spasms during or after intense exercise. Heat exhaustion, which is defined as decreased blood volume and the ability to cool the body, and decreased oxygen delivery. Heat exhaustion is characterized by a rapid but weak pulse, low blood pressure, disorientation, profuse sweating, and fainting. Finally, the most severe is heat stroke, where your core body temperature rises above 105 degrees Fahrenheit, causing decreased sweating. This is characterized by hot, dry skin, extreme confusion, and can lead to unconsciousness. So this table comes from your text. It's showing if you look at the environment in which you're exercising, look at the relative humidity across the top and the air temperature down the left-hand side. This chart can provide you with an idea of how long it's safe to engage in physical activity before having danger of a heat-related illness. So the colors here are described on the right, showing the likelihood and the how dangerous it would be to exercise in those conditions. Hyponatremia. This is something we talked about when we talked about minerals, particularly sodium. Hyponatremia, you'll notice the Na is highlighted in red. That's because Na is the chemical symbol for sodium. So that's kind of how you might remember. Hypo means low, so very literally this word means low blood sodium. So early symptoms of decreased blood sodium include nausea, muscle cramps, disorientation, slurred speech, and confusion. Can cause water to move from your blood to tissues by osmosis, causing swelling. In the lungs, this interferes with gas exchange, and in the blood, the swelling can cause disorientation and, more severely, seizure, coma, and even death. Sweating results in the loss of sodium, and during endurance events, sweat needs to be replaced with both water and sodium. So this diagram is from your book showing your normal blood sodium concentration on the left. Then as the person exercises and sweat is lost, that involves a loss of both water and sodium. You'll notice in the last picture, the concentration of sodium in the body is much lower than in the first example. So that person is drinking water and replenishing their body's stores of water and sodium. Fluid recommendations for exercise. Fluid recommendations include generous amounts in the 24 hours before an exercise session, making sure that you aren't starting off in a state of dehydration. Then recommendations are about 2 cups of fluid 4 hours before exercise, 6 to 12 ounces of fluid every 15 to 20 minutes for the duration of the exercise. And then after the exercise, each pound of weight lost should be replaced with 16 to 24 ounces or 2 to 3 cups of fluid. For exercise lasting an hour or less, water is the only fluid needed. I know a lot of people like drinking different sports drinks, Gatorade, Powerade, things like that when they work out, but the truth is, if you're working out for an hour or less, you don't actually need any of that extra sugar. It's not doing you any favors. In fact, that extra sugar is probably just getting stored as fat if it's not getting burnt off. Now, with exercise lasting more than an hour, you do want beverages containing a carbohydrate, about 10 to 20 grams of carbohydrate per cup, and electrolytes, including sodium, to replenish those stores. Fruit juices and soft drinks are not recommended as a carbohydrate source unless they're diluted with an equal volume of water. Food and drink to optimize performance. Competitive athletes need to plan. They need to plan what to eat before, during, and after competition, and also plan the type and amount of food eaten at these times. Dietary, carbohydrate, and endurance. So this is just showing you different diets and how those different diets can affect your ability to be physically active. So if somebody is on a low carbohydrate diet, it's only going to be about 60 minutes, so about an hour till their body becomes exhausted. On a normal diet, that would be about 100 minutes till exhaustion, and on a high carbohydrate diet, your time to exhaustion increases to about 180 minutes or 3 hours. So you'll notice, depending on the amount that you want to be able to be physically active, the longer period of time, you want to make sure that you increase your carbohydrate intake to make up for that extra use. Maximizing glycogen stores. So remember, glycogen is how our body stores glucose, which is the building block of carbohydrates. So when you're consuming carbohydrates before a physical activity or to train for physical activity, that glucose is being stored as glycogen. Then while you're physically active, your body draws on those glycogen stores for energy. So to maximize those stores, you want to substantially increase muscle glycogen before competition. This involves resting for 1 to 3 days before competition while consuming a very high carbohydrate diet. Now, a very high carbohydrate diet is considered 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day. It's beneficial to endurance athletes, but is a disadvantage if your exercise only lasts less than 90 minutes. So again, this recommendation is really for high endurance athletes and not just for your average day-to-day activity. What to eat before exercise: make sure to consume enough fluid to maintain hydration so that you can maintain hydration throughout the duration of the exercise. High in carbohydrate, 60 to 70% of your total calories from carbohydrates. Eating a meal that contains about 300 calories is moderate in protein and low in fat, also low in fiber. Avoiding spicy foods, as that could lead to GI upset during activity, and avoid large amounts of simple sugars. The pre-competition meal. So that is what we just talked about on this last slide. This is kind of showing you an example. Obviously just making sure that you're eating a healthy, balanced meal so that you're able to be active at an optimal performance level for your desired amount of time. What to eat during exercise. Consuming carbohydrate is particularly important for exercise in the morning when your liver glycogen levels are starting out really low. Carbohydrate intake should begin shortly after the exercise begins, and then regular amounts should be consumed every 15 to 20 minutes during exercise at a rate of about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And the carbohydrate consumed should provide you with both glucose and fructose. These can include snacks and sports drinks that provide sodium along with carbohydrate and fluid. What to eat after exercise. First and foremost, make sure that you replace lost fluids so that your body can become rehydrated. Then it's important to replace your glycogen stores. For 30 to 60 minutes of daily exercise, a typical diet with about 55% of calories is sufficient. So with 30 to 60 minutes of daily exercise, no real change is needed. However, for serious athletes competing on consecutive days, a high carbohydrate meal or drink of 1 to 1.5 grams of easily absorbed carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight should be consumed within 30 minutes and every 2 hours for about 6 hours. All right, next up, ergogenic aids. So ergogenic aids are substances, appliances, or procedures that improve athletic performance. Many vitamins, minerals, and substances in these supplements may provide energy for exercise or promote exercise recovery. Most do not improve athletic performance, though a few have a small effect when compared to a healthy diet. Most are promoted based on their function. However, supplementation does not improve function. Different supplements to build muscle. First, growth hormone, or GH, increases muscle protein synthesis, but has not been shown to enhance muscle strength, power, or aerobic exercise capacity. Growth hormone does improve anaerobic exercise capacity, but can cause heart dysfunction, high blood pressure, and excessive growth of some body parts. Ornithine, arginine, and lysine stimulate growth hormone release. These are amino acids, but they do not cause muscle mass or muscle strength increases more than exercise alone. So the short takeaway message here: growth hormone, totally not worth it, totally not worth the money, and totally not worth the side effects. Anabolic steroids are synthetic fat-soluble hormones that mimic testosterone. They accelerate protein synthesis and increase muscle size and strength. Steroid precursors, examples, androstenedione. I don't even know if I can pronounce it. Androstenedione, or andro, can be converted into steroids in the body, but have not been found to increase testosterone levels or have ergogenic effects. So obviously you're not going to have to spell or write or say a lot of these words that are pretty complicated. The real take-home message here is that anabolic steroids work to mimic testosterone, and they do increase muscle size and strength, though they haven't been found to have any ergogenic effects. Side effects of anabolic steroids: they decrease testosterone shrinkage, testosterone secretion, leading to testicle shrinkage and decreased sperm production in males. Anabolic steroids can also lead to stunted height in adolescence, as well as oily skin, acne, water retention in the tissues, yellowing of the eyes and skin, coronary artery disease, liver disease, death, psychological and behavioral changes, including violent outbursts and increased risk of depression and suicide. So again, anabolic steroids, unlike growth hormone, there is evidence to suggest that it increased muscle mass and size, but those are some pretty severe side effects and risks that you would be increasing in your body. So again, probably not worth taking. Better to just stick to natural exercise and vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients to increase growth of your muscles and body tissues. Anabolic steroids, this comes right from your text. So high levels inhibit hormone release by the hypothalamus and increase testosterone, which then affects the anterior pituitary and cells in the testes. This is just kind of showing you how that whole cycle works with the side effect impacting male reproductive organs. Supplements to enhance performance in short, intense activities. The first is beta-hydroxybutyrate, otherwise known as HMB. So when you see that little fancy B, that's beta. So that's the Greek letter beta. So this would just read beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate. Again, not something you're going to have to be able to spell. It can just be abbreviated to HMB. Studies found a small increase in strength in previously untrained men with trivial effects in trained lifters. The next, bicarbonate, acts as a buffer to neutralize acid to delay fatigue and improve performance. It also can cause abdominal cramps and diarrhea. Last, creatine is used to make creatine phosphate to provide quick energy for short-term maximal exercise, and there's been some evidence to show that it may increase muscle mass and strength. Supplements to enhance endurance work to increase fat or oxygen available to muscle cells. These include carnitine, which is a fat burner, increases fat utilization during exercise to spare the use of glycogen. Supplements have not been shown to increase endurance. Next, we have medium chain triglycerides, or MCT. They cause blood fatty acid levels to rise, increasing the availability of fat as a fuel. Supplements have not been shown to increase endurance, spare glycogen, or enhance performance. So again, a lot more money wasted on either of these supplements. And next, caffeine enhances fatty acid release to use as a fuel source, so less glycogen is used and fatigue onset is delayed. Caffeine can improve concentration and enhances alertness. may impair performance by causing GI upset. So if you're consuming caffeine before or during exercise as a means of enhancing your endurance, it could actually cause GI upset. 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight, which is the equivalent of about 2.5 cups of regular coffee, up to an hour before exercising, and smaller doses during exercise have been shown to improve endurance. And finally, erythropoietin, which is abbreviated EPO, again, not something you're going to have to spell, is produced by the kidneys to stimulate red blood cell production. It can enhance endurance by increasing the ability to transport oxygen to the muscles to increase aerobic capacity and spare glycogen. Too much EPO can stimulate too many red blood cells, which isn't good because too many red blood cells trying to force themselves through your blood vessels all at once can actually lead to blood clotting. Severe clotting, as we know, can then lead to heart attacks, stroke, and even death. All right, that's the last slide that I have for chapter 10. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you learned a lot, and if you have any questions, feel free to bring those to lab so that we can go over them as a group, because if you have a question, likely somebody else does. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your week until I see you on Thursday. Thanks.